creating warp type in Photoshop. Warping, what is it? It makes it possible to distort type so that it sort of conforms to a shape. It warps it to a shape. You do not have to rasterize type in order to use the warp text feature. Now, before we start and before I show you the warp text styles, there are 15 of them, I want you to know that a little bit goes a long way. It's like salting your food. Don't overdo it or you'll wreck the composition. You'll wreck what you're trying to do. So if you pay attention to really good graphic design, whether it's on product packaging or on posters or what you see in advertisements, in newspapers, magazines, on commercials, you'll find that there's not a lot of warped text happening. And that's because it can really make your work look like it was done by a novice. It does not look professional unless it fits and is done well, which you have to be cautious with. So just to put that out there, I don't want everybody to go crazy and all of a sudden warp all of their text, and then we look like we've created a lot of junk. Okay, so this is how you do warp text, because it is kind of fun, and there are certain situations when it would work to have warped text. So I'm going to use the type tool. I'm going to click on that or press T on my keyboard, and I'm going to click and make some text. So it doesn't matter what I type here. We'll just do type, and I'll type it in capitals so that you can see a little bit more clear what's happening with this warp. So like I mentioned, you have 15 styles in the warped text dialog box. Where do I find that dialog box? Up at the top under what we call the type tool options bar. So the options bar that's visible when I have the type tool active. And it's the little T with the arch below it. Okay, so when it pops up, it looks fairly small, and I have a style here right now set to none. Here are my styles that I can choose from. So we have arc, arc lower, arc upper. We have arch, bulge, a shell lower, a shell upper, flag, wave, fish, rise, fisheye, inflate, squeeze, and twist. So when we look at some of these, let's just play with one. Let's say we choose kind of a standard arch. Okay, so when we do that, by default, a setting will appear here and we can see what's happening. So there is no preview button or option. It just goes ahead and shows us a preview, which is very beneficial because you would have no idea what you're doing without seeing it. So we have horizontal and we have vertical. Horizontal determines the left to right direction of the warp style, and vertical does the top to bottom or up to down direction of the warp style. So you can choose whichever you want, horizontal or vertical. And then we have bend, and notice that these settings are the same for all of the styles. Bend determines which side of the type will be affected. So if I go back to a 0 here, you can see my baseline is actually straight. It's a straight horizontal line. This is sort of a reset kind of feel if I have zeros in all of these. So if I go to the left, you see how it bends in a downward arc. And if I go bending to the right, a positive number, it arcs to the top. Okay, so any of them in between, you can see I can do little bits, or I can go pretty extreme. This is 100, and this is 100 in the other direction. All right, so that's the bend. And then I also have a distortion. And I'm going to go back to something fairly low so you can actually see what the horizontal and vertical distortions are doing. So it determines if the left or the right side of the type will be warped in this horizontal distortion. So here you go. It kind of is like it's throwing it in perspective. It applies a perspective to it. Okay, and if I go the other direction, you can see kind of some interesting effects. You might be able to see how this could actually be a little bit beneficial. And if I go back to the 0, just sort of reset that and do the vertical now, this determines if the top or the bottom, there you go, will be warped. So it applies perspective in that method. So this is kind of fun. It looks like it could be growing out of something. Okay, so there are ways that you can use these warps in a very low key, not completely over the top, and so it will fit well within your designs. Now I can click OK. And notice my text layer, the T has a little arch under it, indicating that this is warped type. So I actually can go back up to my warp text here, and I can change these settings. So if I decided that, oh, I didn't want that quite that much, I could go back and change it. So it's completely editable. My text is still editable. I'm still in a vector world with my type. So what I can do with this now is I actually can add layer styles. If I click on this layer here, FX layer style, I know it's cutting off what you see here, but I can do something like a drop shadow, which is at the very bottom of the list. And I tend to like to see my drop shadows. I drag them myself. Let's go ahead and maybe size this a little bit. I want to increase the settings. I can change the opacity a bit so it's not as intense. So it looks like it really is popping out of the page. So I can go ahead and apply any of these layer styles to this effect. I can add a filter. I can color this by sampling from a different picture. I can, take my eyedropper and sample from an image that I might have also visible, and go ahead and change the color of it. I can stroke this. So there's a lot of things I can do on top of the warp type. So it's not that you can just warp type and it has to be like that. You can do other and kind of compound the effects together.